Training camps have opened up around the league. It's hockey time again. We've got that plus our women's hockey spotlight and some hockey down under this weekend. All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And you can also find us on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just do a search for Locked On NHL. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. I am Gil Martin. I am here every Friday along with Rachel Donner. And happy Friday, Rachel.
Happy Friday. Yep, we've got preseason hockey this weekend. Very excited to get going and be able to talk about some actual games again.
Yeah, it feels good. You here in New York, at least, there's a little chill in the air, especially at night or early in the morning. You could feel fall is here, and that means hockey is here as well. And all teams around the league have basically started training camp, and yet when you start training camp, there's always little bits of injury news that you may not necessarily be that happy to hear.
Yeah, new season, new injuries, and of course, you never want to see people start out the season with an injury. Of course, there's some we already knew about that were from last season that were carryovers. Like we know Robin Leonard's out for the season. We know for the Florida Panthers, Aaron Ekblad and Brandon Montour had off-season surgeries from their Stanley Cup run. So, some teams are already a little behind the eight ball in terms of their personnel, but knew about it. But then there's always like some new stuff that happens as well. People get hurt over the summer doing their off-season training and such. Logan Couture is week to week with a lower body injury. Not sure when he's coming back. Jake Gensel is supposed to miss about 5 regular season games for the Pens. Torrey Krug is supposed to be ready for game 1 for the Blues, but you obviously never know a timetable with these things.
Yeah, and then you have just sort of the little day-to-day kind of injuries. But again, you're starting training camp with that. Matthias Ekholm of Edmonton basically listed as day-to-day. And amazingly enough, they were a little more specific about his injury, hip flexor tightness rather than just upper body or lower body, although he says it's just a couple of days and he should be ready to go after that. So, that's a little bit of good news there. And, Cale Makar in Colorado also considered day-to-day, but, they're already missing Landeskog. You don't want to be missing Makar as well.
Yeah, and we knew Makar was banged up, but I think that it's a huge deal for the Avs to be missing both those guys, to your point. So hopefully, he can get back sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and that's obviously, important for Colorado. But again, here's the thing. It's an 82-game season, and then you have playoffs, especially if you're the Avalanche, most likely going to the playoffs. You're better off making sure guys are a little more rested now and making sure that they're available when the games start to count.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that's the most important part here. I think, with the Sharks specifically, they're still in this rebuild mode, but Logan Couture is like a huge part of that team and their captain. And so, you know, you really think that, you know, a lot of the young kids on that team and what they're trying to build need a guy like Logan Couture around, right? As a role model and just his energy on the ice and setting an example. So I do think that even though the Sharks aren't like a top tier team, I think considering where they are in their rebuild, it's an important factor here.
No question. And look, let's even put it this way. He helps them sell tickets. I mean, people are
Yeah,
going to pay money to see
that is
Logan
true.
Couture, a guy they know, a guy they've rooted for years. So, important in that respect, especially when, the team is probably going to be in rebuilding mode this year. So, my Islanders got a little bit of good news. Alexander Romanov, the defenseman, they weren't sure if he was going to be ready to start training camp. He had shoulder surgery during the offseason, but Romanov was on the ice on Thursday when the Islanders opened camp. So a little bit of good news there for my team. How about the Flyers? Any injury updates in Philadelphia?
We had a couple guys injured in rookie camp, but the good news is that we have the return of Sean Couturier and Cam Atkinson, both of whom skated in the first day of training camp and had good things to say, and are supposedly feeling good. Knock on wood, as Danny Briere said. So I think that we'll have to see whether they can manage the wear and tear of the physicality and contact hockey and the travel and all of that. See where we are when the season is about to begin.
Yeah. Meanwhile, future Hall of Famer Patrick Kane, he says he needs at least one more month of rehab, so he's not quite ready to start as of right now. How do you think that affects him over the course of the rest of this season?
Well, I certainly wouldn't think that somebody's holding a roster spot for him. That's for sure.
Yeah.
At this point, given all of that. So I don't know what that means in terms of him playing this season, but I certainly think that diminishes the chances by quite a bit.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't help his cause. And then up in Montreal, they announced that forward Christian Dvorak won't make his season debut until November. And, he had season-ending knee surgery in March of last year. Was originally expected to be ready for the start of this season, but looks like a little bit of a setback there. And that certainly doesn't help the Habs early on in the season.
No, it does not. But again, they're a team that expectations are not extremely high. So I feel like they'll be able to weather that a little bit better than other teams.
Yeah. Now, last week on the show, we did talk a little bit about captains. Two captains have since been announced, and the Blackhawks announced they're not going to have one this year. So we can cross those teams off the list. But what were your thoughts about the two teams that did announce their captains?
Yeah, well, with the Blackhawks, that is what we said they should do. So I'm very glad that they took our advice and did not name a captain. But yeah, the St. Louis Blues naming Braden Shen a captain, we said there was a pretty good chance that was going to happen, and it did. And I'm certainly thrilled for him. And I think he's earned it. He's a leader on that team. And I can't believe, like I said last week, I can't believe he is a grizzled old veteran in the NHL now. But he's put in his time and his dedication to St. Louis. I think it was the right move for that team. For Boston, I think we only had a little bit of a doubt that they would give it to Brad Marchand, just because we don't know how much longer he was going to be around, and maybe they would want to give it to Coyle or something, for a captaincy that would potentially last longer than what we think Brad Marchand's will be. But it's not unearned, that's for sure. I think Brad Marchand is a great guy to name Bruins captain. It's just a matter of how long will that tenure be.
Yeah, and I mean, they could have gone somewhere else for longer continuity wearing the C, but I guess they're thinking short term and looking to who's the best available guy right now. So that certainly plays into it. Meanwhile, the NHL Board of Governors approving the sale of the Ottawa Senators. Your thoughts about that move?
Well, it seemed like that was the natural course of things, and it's glad to see it's proceeding, and they'll get some resolution and a new ownership group that'll maybe get them a new arena downtown, and that's all they want, and that's what I want for Senators fans.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's keep an eye on that, but at least the sale has gone through. So we have got a lot more to discuss on today's episode. We will have our women's hockey spotlight, which we have every other week with Erica L. Ayala coming up next. And we've got some preseason hockey down under and here in North America as well as hockey returns this weekend. All that and more still to come on this episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Birddogs make you look good. They have stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg to give you that truly sculpted look. And Birddog shorts do the same exact thing as Lululemon, but they fit way better. They have a better fit than regular shorts because regular shorts are made of a stiff, restricting cotton. But Birddogs fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches, so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. And Birddogs uses an anti-stink, sweat-wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. Birddogs are functional, and you can wear them for any occasion. So go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or enter promo code LockedOnNHL at checkout for a free Birddogs water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL for a free water bottle at checkout. You won't want to take your Birddogs off. We promise you.
Hey, hockey fans, Erica Ella Ayala, your host of Locked On Kraken, coming to you with another women's hockey spotlight update. And I was just in Toronto. I got to cover the PWHL Draft, the first ever draft for the Professional Women's Hockey League. Really, the first time that we've seen such a production for a women's hockey draft. The CWHL, Canadian Women's Hockey League, used to carry an in-person draft, but it was super small. And similarly to the CWHL, the NWHL had a draft, but there was also a lot of player autonomy. Now, the PWHL is really trying to have this be players that are designated to teams through the draft. Although there is something called a compassionate circumstance waiver, and I've been trying to find out from the PWHL exactly how that works. It's a little bit ambiguous, but we'll get to that in a moment. Here is how the first round went. Many people had suspected that Taylor Heise would be the first player off the board since Minnesota had the first pick. Heise went to the University of Minnesota coming out of the NCAA. And so that is where Minnesota goes first forward off the board. The first defender off the board came with the very next pick when Toronto chose veteran defender Jocelyn Larocque, who had to field a lot of questions about her age in this draft. Now, there were some players that I think did go for younger players, but you also saw a decent amount of experience or veterans were selected. Jocelyn Larocque going second overall to Toronto, and talking about just that, it's really great for her to continue on in a new league in the same area, the GTA, Greater Toronto area, that she's been able to play in the CWHL and also the PWHPA. For the third overall pick, first international player, Alina Mueller. Now, Mueller is also the first player who signed with the PHF who was taken off the board. Now, Mueller did not play in the Premier Hockey League, in the Premier Hockey Federation. So many acronyms. She didn't play in the Premier Hockey Federation because that league was acquired by the PWHL before she got to suit up for her first season. As fate would have it, she did go to Boston after signing with the Boston Pride. Alina Mueller told us at Toronto that she was hoping that she would go to Boston, and she's glad that she will indeed get to continue her career, her pro career in Boston after being at Northeastern for so long. With the 4th overall pick, another defender off the board, New York selected Ella Shelton from Clarkson University, also played in the PWHPA. She's from Canada, and pretty solid pick here. At number 5, another defender, and 6 would close out a defender as well. Savannah Harmon from the United States, also a Clarkson University alum, goes to Ottawa, and then Montreal with their 6th overall pick, their 1st round pick, goes with Erin Ambrose. So 3 Clarkson graduates close out the top round. All 3 defenders, all 3 played in the PWHPA. Again, Alina Mueller, the first international player off the board, and Taylor Heisey, the 1st overall pick. The first goaltender picked was Nicole Hensley in the 2nd round. She went to Minnesota and talked a lot about, knowing the Minnesota area and being excited to play there. So Sophie Jakes went 10th overall in the 2nd round. I definitely think she could have been a 1st round pick. I was a little bit surprised that she was not. Kristen Campbell became the first Canadian goaltender. She went in the 3rd round. She goes to Toronto. Another goaltender pick that I'm actually really excited about, and that is Corrine Schroeder, 33rd pick overall, 3rd pick in the 6th round to New York. I think New York's getting a really good goaltender here. We heard from some of the teams that they still have to do some work in free agency on the back end of the draft, getting their 2nd goaltender. So good on New York for grabbing a goaltender. A few other things that I think were important. We mentioned that Alina Mueller was the first international player in the 1st round, that being someone playing outside of the United States or someone that was born outside of the United States or Canada. But there were 3 players that were from Team Czechia that attended the draft, and all 3 got drafted. That started with Dominika Lashkova, who was the first pick in the 4th round to Montreal. And the defender went to Merrimack College, played in the Premier Hockey Federation, and will play for Montreal. And then we also saw Susanna Tapani go to Minnesota in round 5. And she's not from the Czech Republic, but a Finnish player. She did not play last season, so that's a pretty big pick right there. But the other 2 Czech players that I really liked, who were in attendance, I should say, because Aneta Tezhralova got taken in the 7th round by Ottawa, and then Teresa Vanishova was taken in the 7th round right after Tezhralova. She's going to go to Montreal. Really like these picks, really like the Team Czechia players, and I'm glad that they have been drafted into this new league. A reminder for some that the Czech national coach is also a PWHL coach. She will be coaching the Ottawa team. So Tezhralova will play there. And speaking of Ottawa, they also take one of the captains of Team Czechia, Katarzyna Mrazova. And I really like this pick. She goes in the 8th round. For me, that's a little bit low, but I like that she was selected along with Denisha Kryshova. Now, Kryshova was not at the draft, attended Northeastern University, played in the Premier Hockey Federation for Boston, but also for Minnesota her last 2 seasons. So I like that pick for sure. But overall, it was a great sentiment to the draft. I think the teams, in my opinion, that had the best strategy for the draft were Montreal and Ottawa. No surprise there. Montreal really leaned into analytics, and Ottawa had some help with their recruitment and their draft preparation by the assistant coach for the Coachella Valley Firebirds, Jessica Campbell, who also played for Hockey Canada. So that's probably why their drafts stood out to me. Plenty of work for all of these teams to do in the next free agency period. Also, some players that were curiously left off of the board: Ali Thunstrom, Kaylee Fratkin, Michaela Grant-Mentis, Soroya Tinker come into mind, Madison Packer, who we've had on the show before. So we'll see if those players land in training camp and a part of the extended 28-player roster before the rosters have to be cut down to 23. Still a lot of things we don't know about the league. When is our games going to start? I know that tickets have gone on sale, but where are the venues? What are the official team names? It looks like the colors that we saw at the draft will be the colors that the teams will retain. So still a lot that we have to learn. Still a few things that are up in the air. Like I mentioned, the compassionate circumstance waiver, which Madison Packer applied for. Since the last time we had her on the Women's Hockey Spotlight, she told me she was accepted for that. Ultimately, though, she, unlike Natalie Spooner, who also applied and was accepted for a compassionate circumstance waiver, Madison Packer was told she would not be taken in the draft, so she opted to be a free agent going into the draft, and she's still a free agent, so we'll have to see what happens with Madison Packer. It sounds like there was a ranking system for the PWHL, and anyone who was granted a compassionate circumstance waiver, their team had to pick them within the pack that they were suggested based on the ranking system. I think that's a little bit tough because I don't know. I mean, I know we have a lot of draft rankings, including official draft rankings in other leagues, but to say that a team has to pick a draft pick that has been ranked by the league, I don't know. That seems kind of crazy. And I think it takes away some of the excitement of a draft. You know, everyone thought Shane Wright was supposed to go number 1 to Montreal, and he ends up 4 for Seattle. If you kind of instruct teams that they have to take players at certain times, I think, again, it takes away from the fun. It might even take away from the analytical kind of deep dive that teams are doing as far as what they want their team to look like. So hoping I get more information on that. Did think it was a little bit strange, but overall, like I said, great time for women's hockey. Glad I was able to be up there in Toronto, and make sure you tune in for the next Women's Hockey Spotlight, where we will have more for you. Erica Lindsay Ayala, sending you back over to Rachel and Gil.
So much going on. It is great to have hockey back this weekend as the NHL preseason gets underway. And Rachel, the big spotlight is in Australia at the Rod Laver Arena. We're going to see some hockey down under.
Yeah, it's happening in Melbourne, and I think it should be pretty fun. I'm not sure how much of it I'll get to see being on the East Coast in the U.S., where the games start at 12:05 a.m. But if you are in Pacific time, where the playing teams are actually in, the games start at 9 p.m. Tonight, as well as tomorrow night, with the Yotes versus the Kings. And the Yotes have a very weird split squad thing happening with some games in North America as well. So their roster that they sent over was leaner in numbers, but is pretty much the heavy hitters for their team as much as they exist. So you've got Nick Bustad, Clayton Keller, Jason Zucker, like all those guys, Logan Cooley, Lawson Krause over there, and the Kings basically brought everybody because they're not split squatting it. So we'll see who winds up playing in those games over there and how they manage their roster. But it's pretty exciting having hockey in Australia. We've talked about it in the past on the show, and the games are finally here. And they are at least the first game in Australia is the first game of the preseason.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to me when you're playing overseas, especially a less traditional market like Australia. What's the crowd going to be like? How are they going to react to seeing NHL preseason hockey? I wonder what we could expect there.
Well, there is a pro league in Australia, so small as it might be, it is mighty. But people do know hockey there, and I know plenty of Australians who love hockey. And so I think it'll be a fun crowd, especially if you look at the crowds they have for like Aussie rules football and and all of that. They're an excellent sporting audience, so I'm sure they will all have a good time.
Now, Saturday, two other games, both of them also involving the Arizona Coyotes, as you alluded to. They have a split squad game, two of them with the St. Louis Blues, one at 3:00 in the afternoon and one at 8:00 in the evening, all times Eastern. So the Blues and the Coyotes with split squads, not including all the players that the Coyotes sent over to Melbourne.
Yeah, and then they have one of those games in St. Louis and the other one in Wichita, Kansas. So some neutral site games happening as well. I do love that the NHL does this in the preseason and has some neutral site games. I think the Yotes are playing yet another one against the Dallas Stars. Like whatever that squad is that's playing in Wichita, I think is also going to be playing against the Stars somewhere else as well. But yeah, it's a ton of fun. And, it's a chance for the guys that were in rookie camps to maybe carry that over and show what they can do against limited NHL competition. I would say in teams' first preseason games, they tend to have very few of their opening night roster in those lineups.
Yeah, but you know what? You put on the NHL jersey, you go out there, you've got, your coaching staff. It'll mean something to these guys, and that's a beautiful thing. Meanwhile, Sunday, a whole bunch of games on the schedule, and we could start with the 1:00 Eastern time game, the Blue Jackets and the Penguins, a nice little Metropolitan Division matchup there.
Yeah, well, it'll be a surprise. Well, it's not a surprise anymore, but somebody different behind the bench for the Blue Jackets than we would have thought a week ago, even.
Yeah.
So that should be interesting up against Mike Sullivan, legend, as well in Pittsburgh. So that part of it should be interesting in and of itself. But I think that, you can't go wrong with even a preseason matchup. There's going to be some kids trying to get jobs, and so it should be pretty feisty.
Yeah, you got the Sabres and the Capitals, the Maple Leafs and the Senators over at the Canadian Tire Center. Always great to see rivalry games, early on in preseason. The Wild and the Avalanche, the Rangers and the Bruins in Boston. And how about the Jets and the Oilers at Rogers Place, 6:00 Eastern time on that one?
Yep, I think it's a really good lineup of some rivalries, like you said, and a bunch of different teams getting some action on Sunday, and some of the other teams will kick in on Monday and Tuesday as well. So, over the next few days, we will have seen pretty much every team play.
Yeah, and that's always a welcome thing. I know my Islanders don't get underway until Tuesday night when they face the Rangers. But again, I think it's by Tuesday, all 32 NHL teams will have played at least one preseason game. And it's just so good to have hockey back. A lot of these games will be televised, whether it's on NHL Network or ESPN Plus or one of the local broadcast stations around the North America. So lots to look forward to as the NHL preseason gets underway. And I'm excited. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, from a Flyers perspective, there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of, I think expectations are at an interesting level for this season, we'll say. But, the guys should use it as motivation. And that's what Danny Briere said. And that's what John Tortorella said. And we'll see what happens.
Yep, but great to have hockey back and underway. I want to thank everyone again for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day, everydayers. Monday, I will be back talking to three of our local hosts with some of the biggest stories around the league. And again, we'll actually have some preseason games to talk about. So make sure you join us for that. And we are here every Monday through Friday covering the biggest stories from around the league. I'm Gil Martin. She's Rachel Donner. I want to thank everyone again for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.